Hello everyone, my name is André and I'm the host of the PDHPE Teachers Association podcast, and welcome to our podcast and webinar series where we talk to a number of incredible individuals in the space of physical education. Today I am joined by Shane Pill. Shane Pill is a professor of physical education and sport at Flinders University and is a life member and fellow of the Australian Council of Health and Physical Education and Recreation. Shane has published a number of research and scholarly report and publications and has published a range of books on physical education and coaching. Shane holds a Bachelor of Education, Masters of Educational Leadership, Doctor of Philosophy, and a Gold Level 3 AFL Coaching Accreditation. Shane, how are you going?
Doing very well, thank you. It's a beautiful day in Adelaide.
Excellent. It's a beautiful day in Sydney as well. We are distance apart, so I do appreciate the time that you're giving us to have this chat. Now, Shane, you've done a number of talks. You've certainly been in the space of physical education. Before we start, what is your experience in PDHP? So, you've come from a teaching background to now, working at Flinders University. How did that start for you?
When I went through Teachers College, the very first lecture we had by John Daly, a former head of Australian track and field coaching, a couple of Olympic Games as a track and field coach, he said, "You're going to love this degree. You'll get immense satisfaction out of doing a phys ed degree, but I highly recommend that you do science or maths as your second subject area, because that'll be what gets you a job." Of my graduating class of about 45, the majority went interstate for their first jobs because there weren't a lot of jobs in Adelaide for phys ed teachers at that time. I ended up in Perth. I got a job over the phone back in the day when people would make landline phone calls. Got offered a job, moved to Perth in January. I taught in Perth for 8 years. And then when my wife and I were expecting our first child, moved back to Adelaide. Taught in Adelaide for a further 10 years. I was a deputy principal in a school and wondering whether that was the right pathway for me. I think I would have liked to have been a principal, but I wasn't enjoying some of the things that came with the deputy principal role, and thought I might get back into a head of department because that's where I really enjoyed curriculum, pedagogy. I led 3 Australian government quality teacher programs in the past 4 years at that stage, and really enjoyed the adult education space as well. And the job was at Flinders University. My wife said to me, "There's a job going at Flinders, why don't you have a go at that? Might be nice to do something different." I did. I was fortunate to win the position, took 2 years leave without pay, and now I'm 19 years at Flinders University. So this year the ledger is flipped over, so I'm longer in university than I was in schools for the first time.
Wow. Congratulations, firstly, on such a breadth of experience. I can imagine that you look back with such fond eyes and go, gosh, that was such a journey. And someone who is gently touching on the university space, I can certainly agree that it's very different. It is very different to the classroom. Still the same worry about assessments and all that, but still, you've got an incredible career, and, I'm very much looking forward to talking about it today. Getting straight into it, Shane, you've seen what new teachers are coming out with in terms of their delivery, their pedagogy, their morals, their value systems when it comes to PDHP teaching. From where we are now, from where we used to be, where do you think pedagogy has changed? Or do you think the overall approach to purely physical education has changed from, let's say, when we were teaching younger to where it is in 2025?
There's a couple of things that have changed. There was no HP or PDHPE when I started my teaching, and when I went through Teachers College, we were trained to be physical education teachers, and it was assumed that we could teach health education because health education was seen as part of teaching physical education. There was a lot more time spent in becoming practically competent at Teachers College under the assumption that we had to be able to do what we were asking the students to be able to do, and not to ask students to do things that we couldn't do ourselves, which is all very well when you're a 18 to 22-year-old. You can do round-offs over a beam, you can kick a football, you can do a layup, but when you get to 58 point something years of age and you've got a disc that sits out of place and a thumb that's been repaired and patella tendon, you can't do those things anymore. So looking back, it was an unrealistic expectation that physical education teachers needed to be able to demonstrate to the students authentically what they were asking the students to do, because obviously as you get older, injuries and other things take account of your body. You can't do what you could do when you're younger. But I guess the main difference that I see is we were assessed on our practical competence coming into Teachers College. So it wasn't just on our ATAR. There had to be a report from the school stating the range of sports that you had participated in and to what level. So there may have been people that got a higher ATAR score than me, but didn't get into the physical education degree because they didn't have the breadth and the level of sport acumen that I had developed during my secondary school career. So it was a very sporty and very athletic cohort that went through Teachers College during my era. During the 1990s, the physical education had been under a period of stress and pressure. So, for example, when computers came in, schools looked around and said, do we put them in the classrooms or do we create a subject? It was decided to create a subject. Where does time come from for that subject? Time came from physical education. So physical education in a lot of schools had a fight back that it shouldn't be our subject that lost the time. Around about the early 1990s, there was a Senate inquiry into the decline of physical education in Australian schools, a worry about the decline in movement ability of young people as a consequence of declining physical education, declining physical activity and community as a consequence of declining physical education, and physical education which hadn't at that stage been part of the national curriculum conversation, which people call statements and profiles, was put back into the agenda. So there was a period of time where we almost lost physical education out of the curriculum and the curriculum became just health education. Fast forward that, the Crawford report in 2009 suggested that physical education had become marginalised, particularly at secondary level, in a subject called HPE. The pedagogical emphasis on developing movement ability that gives people the confidence to be competent, the competent in their confidence to pursue physical activity had become marginalised, and we needed to get a stronger emphasis on teaching physical education again in this subject called HPE. So I've seen a couple of waves go through and different paradigms, but certainly I don't think that physical education has the same weight inside HPE or PDHPE is what it used to have when it was standalone.
I have to admit, Shane, I do agree with you in a lot of the things you've said. When, in my experience, both working in primary and high school settings, if there's a timetable clash, what's the first subject to go? It's usually going to be physical education or one of the dimensions of that. And unfortunately, in some schools, it can be a religion as well. And that certainly has a place in schools as well. Shane, when it comes to PDHPE, what do you think are some of the most common pitfalls you've seen when it comes to teaching? When it comes more in the practical element, what do you think teachers fall very, I'll use the phrase, too comfortably in, and they build a poor routine?
Yeah, I'll link back into the second part of your question, which was around the pedagogy. So the second part of your first question, the big change, when I went to Teachers College, we were taught a very behaviourist approach, progressive part pedagogy. So decomposition of a layup into its starting point, and the starting point was the end, backwards actually. So the rules are 2 steps, release the ball. So we start there, 2 steps, release the ball. Once you can do that, bounce 2 steps, release the ball. Once you can do that, dribble 2 steps, release the ball. Once you can do that, receive the ball, dribble 2 steps, release the ball. Once you can do that, give and go, dribble 2 steps, release the ball. Now you're ready to play a game, progressive part pedagogy. It's what I call the Lego approach to teaching PE, where you take one brick at a time and eventually you build the movement model. And then teaching became focused on a constructivist orientation to go, the students start with action potential. You need to know what that action potential is in order to be able to build from there. Borrowing from Alan Lorna, some of that action potential may be already a dead-end technique, which means that they won't be able to progress because that technique is a block. So think of a fly squatter motion when you're playing badminton. It might be successful to a point, but it's not going to get you to be a highly effective game player because you can't get the wrist promotion and the power and therefore depth into your shots. So you have to unlearn that to relearn a better way to do things. So the art of the phys ed teacher is actually being able to look at the body in motion and work out how to help that body become more efficient and effective in motion. And because you've got different action potentials, you're going to have a range of readiness to learn. The other point that came in really strongly was it's the game that we're trying to teach. So the game should be the starting point of the teaching. The thing that we want people to be able to do is move from phys ed into other settings to be able to play the game. Whether that game be social, leisure, competitive, it's a version of the game that we're wanting people to be able to play. So rather than starting with volleyball as week 1 is forearm pass, week 2 is therefore the set because that comes next in the sequence, then week 3 becomes the hit, then response to the hit is a block, and then week 5 we introduce serve, and now we've taught volleyball. No, we haven't taught volleyball because most of the kids in 5 weeks' time can't be any better than what they were week 1. So we understand that time is a limiting factor to what we're able to teach. So we've got to make some decisions about where we will focus that time, because time on task will give us repetition of learning and volume of practice, which will make that thing become a habit of behavior. So understanding that, we need a range of scale up, scale down for the tasks that we're doing to meet the different action potentials. And from a constructivist perspective, we're representing a version of the game at the readiness to learn of the players. That game gives us our data from which to know where to go to next with the students that we've got, and in particular, the range of where to next that we need in class. So drawing again on Alan Launder, one of the great Australian physical education teachers and athletic coaches, he would say the gold standard practice is pre-test, post-test. So what's the version of the game that you'll play week 1, that you'll play again week 10, that gives you the authentic comparison, the valid and reliable comparison of what they could do week 1 and what they could do lesson 10? Because without that pre-test, post-test, you have no data on whether actually learning occurred. All you have is a measure of performance at the end of your teaching, and that performance may have been exactly the same as what the students could do at the start of your teaching. So we understand pedagogical practice much better than what we did 40 or 50 years ago. And that's understandable because we've got 4 decades of extra research to tell us these things actually power up student potential to be competent and therefore confident to pursue physical activity. These things might be nice to do. That doesn't mean you don't do them, but just be aware that they're not going to power up the learning.
Shane, the whole idea of just letting them play is a huge element in PDHP, particularly on the physical education side. Do you think that pedagogical approach would also apply in a primary setting as well?
Yeah, I've coached back to under 8s using a game-based approach. If you can coach under 8s who are novices in soccer using a game-based approach, you can do it in a phys ed class. I've seen the soccer club down the road for as long. I've been living in the area for 28 years. They bring the 5-year-olds in and start playing 3v3 soccer straight away. So yeah, you don't see a group of 5-year-olds in the schoolyard going, "Hey, teacher, can you come over and give me some instruction on how to play 4-square, down ball, handball, whatever the school calls it." They get in there and they start playing. Yes, there's a fair degree of mimicry of the older students playing the game. So learning by replicating, they get the mental representation of what it looks like from watching the older kids play, and then they get in there and do it. So that calls into question the role of a phys ed teacher in developing movement competence. And of course, we need to be there if we're going to make a difference. So what we can do is actually accelerate the learning by the intentional design of activities that will focus on a particular aspect of movement competence that we want the students to accelerate their development in.
Absolutely. And it's incredible when you see a lot of students on the playground just playing sport. A lot of them are very, very confident and competent already. I know at my school, in a primary setting, there's a number of students that love their soccer, football, we'll call it what it is, wherever you come. And there's unusual talent there. And we just let them play. They organize the game, they organize the rules, and just letting them play with minimal adjustment. Sometimes, that's the best thing we can do, I feel, as PDHPE teachers, is just let them play and provide those minor adjustments when needed, if needed.
And that's the question that's important in the mastery of teaching. So we start the lesson with a game. That game may be retrieval practice. It's intentional towards retrieving what we believe the student should already know, do, and understand. So that becomes an informal assessment. based on whether the students are where we expect them to be with their know, do, understand or not, we would continue with the play or move to a practice, because the students won't be able to do this particular activity just emerging from the play, or we change a condition on the game, which is generally mean adding an exaggeration or a modification of a rule, which will focus the player's attention on a particular aspect, and that focus of attention will lead to hopefully a shaping of behaviour. Now, if the shaping of the behaviour doesn't occur from the focus of their attention, then we may need to go out into a practice task to reduce the information complexity on the players so that they can get the shaping of the behaviour, and then we put them back into the game. That's why I put forward play with purpose as a non-linear pedagogy, because the mastery of teaching is not to be linear through the parts, but to actually respond to the learning needs of the students. Now, when you know your students, because you've done the pre-test, you've got good data on understanding the action potential, you'll be able to anticipate what those students will need. There is the mastery of the teacher, knowing their students and therefore being able to anticipate. In this game, this aspect will break down. When it breaks down, the students realise we need to practice here, whether that's practice by thinking about it in the play or practice by actually decreasing the information load so we can focus on just that particular element. That becomes a question for the teacher to decide where to go to next based on their knowledge. With me, I would probably focus the cognitive intention, give them that organizer, that cognitive organizer, which then shapes their play in the game, and then watch who can figure it out, having that cognitive intention, who's not figuring it out. So therefore, some might need to be extracted from the play to get closer attention on the action that we want them to develop, while the others are able to play because they were able to figure it out. So you get a highly differentiated environment as a consequence, but you actually power up the learning because you're actually addressing the action potential of the students.
And I think, speaking for, someone who did do a lot of sport in their younger day, the whole idea of just letting them play, just less talking, here's your task. And as a student or an athlete, more movement, the better. And I think I really, really understand the value of that. And even as a teacher, you're going to gain a lot more valuable data by seeing them do something that's game related rather than an isolated skill. You've touched on the point of assessment, Shane, and that's always been a very challenging point for PDHPE teachers, is that what do we assess? What data do we collect? Do we get fitness data? Do we collect beep test data? Should we collect sit and reach vertical jump data? If we do, what's the point of it? What kind of data in PDHPE should we be collecting, and what should we be doing with it?
My understanding of Australian curriculum in any state and territory is that there is no direction to be collecting fitness testing data of students. It's not like the US, where some states have mandatory fitness testing recording and assessing on that. Certainly there is, in the achievement standards, a journey that we take the students from to develop their a capacity to be an independent, self-regulated physical activity seeker. That means being able to plan for physical activity that helps them to flourish as an individual. So for those that are very sporty and wanting to pursue a sporting career, that physical activity as part of flourishing or living their best life is going to look very different from those that want to recreate in order to have good health. So by the time we get to secondary level, we've actually got two highways that the students are on. One is recreate towards good health, which may include social or semi-competitive physical activity. For a lot of them, probably doesn't include competitive physical activity at all. Then we've got others who might even be on a vocational pathway to see if I can make a career out of a particular physical activity type. I want to see how good I can get in this. Their needs won't be met in a standardised physical education program. But then if we get into something which is very much focused on developing high-level movement techniques, which is often criticised as the only focus of a secondary phys ed program, those students that just want to recreate in order to keep active and therefore healthy, their needs won't be met through that type of PE program. So I quite like Cote's model, where once we get to 12 years of age, once we get to 13 years of age, so grade 7, we've actually got 2 types of physical education programs happening. We've got the Recreate for active and healthy living, and then we've got the Focus, where people are starting to prune off and go, this is what I want to focus on. That doesn't mean if I want to focus on netball, my PE is going to be netball for 40 weeks of school for a year. But we'll have a focus on the invasion game category that gives transfer of movement, understanding, and competence to that. Not Darren Berry, he was the cricketer. Jason Berry, I think it was, who did his PhD on the Australian footballers, AFL footballers that make the elite level, and showed that it was volume of play in the invasion game category, not AFL specifically, that gave them the cognitive as well as the physical development that boosted them ahead of those that had just played and practiced football and done PE. So we know from studies in soccer, football, basketball around the world that play-based behaviour is the thing that accelerates people's pathways towards elite level sport. Volume of play, the people that make elite level sport have actually played more sport during adolescence, not necessarily the one sport that they become good at, but they're playing a high volume of sport in invasion games or net court games, whatever it might be. But up until primary school, we do need to develop the competence that gives the confidence to pursue being physically active. Because again, we've got more literature in Australia than anywhere else in the world, and that literature tends to point towards the sedentary adolescence of those that lack confidence in their movement competence. So the number one thing that we can get out of primary school PE that will lead to more active adolescence is developing competence in their movement.
And I 100% agree with that and support that. And someone who works particularly a lot with early stage 1, and stage 2, building on those foundations of competence certainly increases that confidence. Even areas of fundamental movement skills, when they can sprint, when they can catch, when they can throw, all those skills I found in my experience have significant increases in just the enjoyability and the want to do sport as well, which is absolutely wonderful. It's what we want. And we want more athletes in Australia. We want more physically competent individuals in Australia. Shane, from your experience as well, you've been teaching for a very long time. And I mean that with all due respect, I mean that in the most wonderful respect. What do you think are some of the misconceptions of PDHP teaching? Because, from me being a PE teacher for over 10 years now, a lot of people a lot of whispers, dare I say, have said that sometimes we're the lazy teachers. Sometimes we just go out and let them play and have fun with no means to our madness. I personally don't think that's the case, but what do you think has been a misconception of teaching, universally and historically?
There's a number, but I'll focus on 2. The first one is the myth of the multi-activity curriculum model. So if we give children experiences and lots of things, they'll find something that they like and wish to pursue it. There is no evidence that multi-activity curriculum model will lead to lots of people suddenly finding something that they like and deciding to pursue it. In fact, if that was the case, we wouldn't have the inactivity crisis that we have today with Australian adolescents and adults. So clearly the multi-activity curriculum model hasn't been setting up Australians for active and healthy living after 10 years of compulsory physical education through school. In fact, quite the opposite. Research 5 years ago said that we rank around about 140th. There's only 6 countries below us out of 160 for adolescent physical activity. So coming out of primary school, the majority of Australian kids don't have the confidence in their competence to continue to see spaces as places for physical activity. So physical education being part of the solution needs to be doing something different in its curriculum structure if it's going to redress that movement crisis that we currently have. And now that movement crisis was recognised in your state, in New South Wales, back in the late 1990s, led to a massive investment in upskilling primary school teachers to be able to teach fundamental movement skills, because it all starts with developing that base level of generic movement competence in the curriculum. The Active Healthy Kids Australia report cards over the last 4 or 5 iterations of that suggest now the majority of Australian kids get to high school without coordination and control of movement competencies that are benchmarked for attainment by the end of year 4. So they're already 2 years behind in phys ed by the time they get to high school.
Mm.
So therefore, that leads me to the second myth, that assessment is not important in PE. If we were assessing the kids against the curriculum, then these kids would be picked up earlier as needing interventions in order to get them to standard. If we move away from this idea of why do we need to assess in PE, it's just about joy of movement, etc. No, well, the joy of movement comes from having the habit of mind of a physical activity seeker. The habit of mind of a physical activity seeker comes from being confident in your competent to activate spaces. It's a habit. It's a habit of thinking that leads to a behavior. So we're actually in the business of developing thinking. We're actually in the business of generating emotions around physical activity that drive people to want to revisit those emotions that they get from physical activity. So therefore we get the repeat behavior. So we've got to take assessment seriously in PE. In fact, in primary school, I'm a big advocate of tracking fundamental movement skill development from entry level through all the way through, so that if there are multiple PE teachers or if the PE has been taken by the class teacher, there is a handover of data from one year to the next. So we actually are tracking when they can competently and confidently in game-like situations, underarm throw, underarm catch, hop, skip, jump. I've lost track now of the number of times, particularly in the last 10 years, where I'm teaching a curriculum studies in primary school health and PE, and we'll be doing a fundamental movement skill locomotor session as a demo activity, and people don't know how to skip. I say, what do you mean you don't know how to skip? I've never been taught how to skip. So there's an absence of education that's occurring in our space. If we've got people coming in studying how to be primary school HPE teachers and they've got movement deficits themselves.
When it comes down to the primary sector, I couldn't agree more in terms of how important that foundation is as well. And you touched on fun as well. And I agree that, you know, in some respect, it has to be fun as well, because it's engaging for the kids. It creates that want to do more. But the value of those fundamental movement skills that I've seen and you've seen as well is it's absolutely imperative. When it comes to...
Can I just touch on the fun factor?
Of course.
My understanding from the work of Kenneman and others, it's actually engagement that powers up the repeat performance. It's what you might call the story that is told. So fun, something could be really fun, but it doesn't lead to repeat performance. It's fun, one and done.
Very true.
Fun is also quite subjective, using a personal experience. Our middle son enjoys rock climbing, finds it fun, and I look at a wall face and I go, that's going to hurt my knee and I've got a fear of falling. So rock face, to me, that's incredibly not just challenging, but anxiety inducing. So we can have people coming into the same activity space and getting different emotional responses from that space. And that's something that we need to be aware of. But if we look at the work of Kenneman, it's actually engagement that leads to a residual feeling of, I want to experience that again, which leads people to the repeat behavior. So what we get out of sport, as an example, is we get what Kenneman might call the Monday morning story. What about that goal? What about that umpiring decision? Right? It's not actually the memory of the entire game, but it's the memory of moments that trigger, let's go and watch that again, because that heightened experience of those moments is something we want to recapture. That's what we need to, that's the joy or the fun that we need to bring into our PE classes, and where some of the work that we've done in taking game theory into PE. So PE typically, like all subjects, you get your reward, your grade at the end of the 5 weeks, 10 weeks unit of work. Well, no, in life, when you do something well, you find out about it then and there. If you're doing a video game, I'll show my age, aren't I? If you're doing a video game, are they still called video games? Anyway, if you're doing online game, and you have consistently demonstrated competency now in the game rewards you by giving you an extra spell, a new power, increased armor. And then once you show consistent competence, you get to go up a level because you can't complete a level. You keep failing at the level if you keep making the same mistakes.
So true.
Now, the reason why those video games require you to have repeated practice and succeed at a level before you get to the next level is because that's good learning theory. You are competent at your level before you go to the next level. Now, video games have the same participatory challenge that physical education has. How do you get people to persist at something that takes a long time to become competent at, involves repeated failure, but you get there at the end and you go, that's brilliant, I'm really good at this.
Gosh,
So we should be borrowing from video game structure things like clear levels of progression and rewarding people when they achieve competencies, whether that's by badges or some other form of recognition, because that's just good curriculum design. They're not doing it in video games because they're video games. Video game design is based on really good educational design theory. So we should be basing our programs on really good educational design theory as well, which will not only power up the learning, but it'll power up the engagement, which will also give a learning boost.
I couldn't agree more when it comes to the gaming element of that, Shane. I think when it comes to video games as well, that's such a common pastime these days. And I feel the reason they pursue that and they get good at video games in that respect is because the failure is silent. They can do it in their own time. They can practice whenever they want. The practice is accessible and the practice is rewarding because at the end of the day, they will get that, like you said, they will have a result. And I think that's really, really important as well as providing the result because that's feedback. In my eyes, that result is essentially feedback that what you're doing is good. Keep going until what you're doing is not working, and then we'll provide you more feedback. This is so good, Shane. This is so good. When it comes to PE, do you think as teachers we're too lax? Do you think and I remember a point that you made in the keynote that you said at last year's PDHPE Teachers Association conference that I found really profound. There's a mouthful for you. That we are too generous with grading. And I feel that we are as well. That in terms of giving out report grades, is everyone actually a sound? Is that child actually extensive in this movement? Do you feel as a group of educators that we are sometimes too easy when it comes to PE grading?
The evidence would suggest yes, by the number of people that get to secondary school without coordination and control of movement competencies that are benchmarked for grade 7 and never catch up, which means they're still not throwing, running, jumping, catching, hopping, skipping with adequate biomechanics by the time they leave year 10. But when we ask these young people what grades you're getting for PE, they're all passing PE. And then when we ask the PE teachers why, they tried really hard, they're giving great effort. Fantastic, they're giving great effort, and we should reward and recognize great effort. But we have a curriculum that sets benchmark levels of attainment. If any other subject area the students are not achieving those benchmark levels of attainment, the parents know. And then it's up to the parents to decide whether they put extra resources in by going to tutors, etc., to catch up. And depending upon the resources of the school, whether the school puts extra resources in there to help the students catch up, because they haven't had enough time to get there yet. So they need extra time, which the school curriculum is not able to provide them. Coupled into that, time keeps coming up as a major theme. If in primary or secondary school, primary school, it doesn't matter. If in the 5 weeks, common structure for a unit of work, it's half a term. In that 5-week unit of work, they've had 5 maths lessons. That's 25 lessons to cover the maths unit. Now, in our primary school, if we're getting 1 lesson a week to provide the same learning time, that's a whole semester for a unit of work. So we've got to take the time question seriously, because it directs back to what we can actually achieve with our students in the time required. In this case, I'm a strong believer in less is more in physical education because of the time that we've got. We've typically got less time than the other subject areas, so we can achieve less outcomes in that curriculum time than other subject areas can.
Mm.
So assessment needs to be taken seriously. Data is our friend. Feedback to the students helps drive their capacity to be independent, self-regulated learners. But the capacity for them to be independent, self-regulated learners means we're not only teaching in physical education for technical and tactical competencies. And for the listeners, excuse me, sport for me is a catch-all term for, skateboarding can be a leisure activity down at the skateboard park, which you're doing just to muck around and be with friends. It can be something that you're doing a little bit more seriously because you want to get tricks and become a little bit better at it. So you're intentionally down the skateboard park to become better. It can be an Olympic sport. And we've got our first ever 14-year-old as a gold medalist in Olympic skateboarding.
So good.
So when I say sport, it's a catch-all for multiple levels of participation. Sport can be a group of friends going down the oval on a Sunday morning and kicking a football around just to get a bit of fitness fun and then go for a coffee. So when I say sport, I've got to be clear for the listeners, I'm not talking about team-based, competitive, club-based sport. There's all different levels in there.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the point, Shane, the more that I hear you talk, the more I hear is just do the thing. If you want to get better at the thing, do the thing. And I love that. I love that. And it seems so simple, but we're missing, I think a lot of us, we miss the mark because we only have an hour. And, that level of generosity sometimes when it comes to grading it's not wise. Like you said, effort's absolutely incredible. And it's fantastic that we have the effort. But in English or maths, if you're showing effort but not meeting the standards, then that's going to be really real in terms of the grading. And I really feel, like you said, we should stick by that. I'm just conscious of time. This has been such an incredible conversation. I wish we could have more. So just a couple of things to wrap up. What advice would you give to new PDHPE teachers and educators coming into the industry? They're fresh-minded, they're excited, they've got all this knowledge behind their belt, but not much practice. What guidance or advice would you give them, or where do you feel that they should hone their attention and upskilling early on?
Yeah, if I look at myself as a first-year out teacher, you're beginning your journey, you're going to make mistakes. Be comfortable with the fact that you'll make mistakes, but be brave enough to challenge yourself, because it's once you start challenging yourself that you'll extend your capability. The other message is that best practice is not necessarily common practice, because to be the best at anything, you've got to put in more effort. But if you put in more effort, you'll get better outcomes from your students. And the students see those that are putting in that little bit extra effort for them. And generally the students respond as a consequence because they know that you're there for them. Data is our friend. If you're working in a sports coaching setting, you're pre-testing your players in order to get a baseline measurement. You're then goal setting with them. You're working on that goal, not 16 other goals. You're working on that goal. And when that goal is achieved, you renegotiate the next goals, and you're doing multiple points of assessment throughout the year. We're not doing that in sport because it's sport. We're doing that because it's best educational practice. So for physical education to be taken seriously, it needs to take itself seriously. That means that physical educators will be concerned with best pedagogical practice.
Gosh, this has been so good. Shane, you're so incredible. I've just loved this chat with you. I wish we could have more. I wish I could just have a pocket Shane and just say, Shane, what are your thoughts on this? This has been so incredible. Before we go, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your expertise and all you give into the physical education space. I hope I meet and I hope we experience more people like you that has the passion, the understanding, the interest and just the drive to just want to create such incredible physical education space for everyone. Where can people reach out to you? Where can people read some of your work and publication and books? Because I do understand that you've published a range of books and I definitely want to get my hands on some as well.
Most of the publications are available through ResearchGate. If you can't I always advise people to go to Google Scholar first, and then from Google Scholar, if it's not available through open access in that way, you can generally find a version of what I've published through ResearchGate, which is free to join for those people that want to extend their reading. I'd encourage them to join ResearchGate, Mendeley, academia.edu, whichever is your favourite fruit, so to speak, because you'll get access to the world of academic papers, generally for free. Most academics are really generous in sending out their work to people because they want their work to be read and impactful. You can also contact me at Flinders University, and again, rather than spelling out my email address here, again, Google's probably the easiest way. Just punch in Shane Peel, it'll take you to the Flinders University website. Click on the email link and you'll be able to contact me that way.
Definitely put that in the show notes as well, so just makes it much easier. And I'll put and do you mind if I put your link to your blog?
Yes, yeah, that'll be fine. Put the link to the blog, that'll be fine. And people can also
Fantastic.
contact me via LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. Shane, again, thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure, probably more for me than anyone else. So thank you again. This has been fantastic. My name is Andre. You've been speaking to Shane Peel, and this is the PDHPE podcast. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk soon.